Hey guys, welcome to this video. So in this video we are going to see the difference between static and dynamic listener. Okay, so this is one of the underrated topic. So DBAs often focus on the database aspects, but they would not be focusing much on the listener part or the network or the client connectivity part, right? So whenever you are configuring any multi-systems like standby database in a data guard, or you are using a true cache, or you are using a rack, right? So for standalone databases you may encounter smaller issues like TNS errors. Okay, so the clients may not be able to connect to the databases because of the misconfiguration in the TNS names connection string or the listener.ora file, right? So but when it comes to the other systems which connects to the standalone, right? So if there is a primary and the standby, then obviously they communicate each other with the TNS names file, and also there will be a listener, right? So what is the best practice, right? So whenever you are using static and dynamic listener, what makes the difference and why we need a static and a dynamic listener, so that we need to understand. Okay, so that is the topic for today's video. So hit a like before you watch the video, and also subscribe if you need more interesting videos for your day-to-day activities. So static listener is by the name itself you can understand. So static means the entries in the network files will not be changed. Okay, so it is kind of a hard-coded configuration, which means you just provide the hard-coded details about the database SID, database home, and the global database name. Okay, so that listener, static listener, will register all these information in the listener. Okay, so we have LREG process, right? So LREG process is the listener registration process, so after 12C, but prior 12C we were using PMO as the registration process, right? But whenever you are using a static listener, we don't need PMO or LREG. Okay, so we need to configure certain parameters like local listener, right? And also you need to specify the listener string, connection string in the listener.ora. Okay, so only for dynamic listener we need either PMON or LREG, and for latest, all the Oracle latest versions, we need LREG as the registration process. So dynamic listener is more intelligent compared to static listener. Okay, so dynamic listener, what it does is it can predict the load on the server. Okay, and it can also load balance the connections based on the current load, also the CPU utilization, the resource utilization on the host, right? And it can understand how the connection should be registered and how the connection should be forwarded to the database. Okay, so it periodically checks the services and it registers with the listener. So that's the dynamic listener. So it's kind of an adaptive listener. Okay, it adapts to whatever services or whatever new configurations that come, right? So based on that, it will just allow the users. So first we need to understand what is the purpose of listener, right? So let me explain it simple. So you can understand the listener similar to a security guard. Okay, so if there is any security guard in any buildings or apartments or any of the company premises, right? So you will be seeing security guards. So what they do, they act as a gatekeeper. So they often sit in front of the gate and they allow the persons who are authorized to enter the premises or the building, right? So if a person, okay, what this gatekeeper do if person A is coming. Okay, so this gatekeeper will get all the details about person A, whether he is part of the apartment or which apartment number he is part of, and whether he is a owner or not, and all these details, his phone number and his name. If this person is authorized to enter the apartment, if he is a owner of the one of the flat in the apartment, then this gatekeeper will allow the person. So there is another person B who is not authorized, who is not relevant, or who is not something related to this apartment. He is some stranger. Okay, so when person B enters, obviously gatekeeper, what he will ask all the details. So if he provides the details, and if those details are not matching with the existing apartment owners, he will just ask additional details, why you are coming, and what is the purpose, all these details, right? So if whatever reason that the person say, and if it is not convincible, then this gatekeeper will not allow. So you can imagine listener as the same. Okay, what listener does is, so the main configuration on the server side is the port. So based on the port only, we will be able to differentiate the listener. So in one server we can run multiple listeners. You can create and run multiple listeners, but each and every listener will be having a different port. Two listeners cannot have the same port. So the default port is 1521 for Oracle, right? So what this listener does is, this listener will be listening, or it acts as a gatekeeper on the server. Okay, so similar to how a security guard acts as a gatekeeper for the house. So you can imagine the house as the server here. Okay, gatekeeper as the listener, or security guard or gatekeeper as the listener. Okay, so how person A enters. So here the client user A is trying to authenticate to this server. Okay, so user A is asking the listener to enter the server and communicate with the database. So what this listener will do, this listener will be listening on port 1521. So this user A should be having all the details, like the port number, the host details, the service details, similar to how this person is having the apartment number. So say for example, if the apartment number is 369, similar to that, you should be having the location of the flat, whether it is a first floor or second floor, and whether he is an owner, what is his name. So similarly, you need the host name, service name, and the port number, and some additional details. So based on that, this client user A will be approaching the listener. This listener will check if this user is having the permissions. First, there are two things. First, authentication, then authorization, right? So what is authentication? So authentication is just checking who is the person who is trying to come inside the server, and authorization is whether the person entering the server have permissions to access the resource or not. Okay, so these questions may be asked in the interviews. So once the listener authenticates, right, based on the user information, so here in the server there will be server process, and from the user side there will be user process. So once the authentication is completed, this listener will fork. So you can take the real-time fork, right, the spoon. Likewise, the listener will fork like the connections like this. Okay, so once the listener forks the connection, then again user A don't need to contact the listener. User A will be directly communicating with the server process. So user process will be communicating with the server process. So that's how it works. But for any new connection, so if the user connection is ended, okay, again user A is initiating a new connection, but for that connection again user A need to approach the listener. Only the existing connections can be forked. Okay, so once the connection is forked, yeah, the server process is free to access the shared memory. Shared memory means the SGA, right? All the resources in the SGA will be accessed. So this is the use of listener, and this is the listener function, right? So next let us come to the static and the dynamic listener. So we already mentioned, right? So static means hard-coded value, dynamic means it's an adaptive value. So listener is manually told about the database tells the listener about itself. So this may be confusing, right? So here in static listener, we need to specify the database details in the listener.ora. So we are telling the listener that this is the database details, and you need to register only these information about the database. Okay, so whatever client who is trying to connect, you need to allow only via these details that I am giving. But for dynamic listener, it's not like that. So here there is no manual entries. So but here we specify the manual entries in the listener.ora file. And you need to check if there is a keyword or entry called SID_list. Okay, so today your homework is to go and check in any of your databases whether your listener is running on a static configuration or dynamic configuration. So if you see this keyword in the listener.ora file, then that means that your listener is configured statically. Okay, if you don't see this keyword, then your listener is not configured statically. Okay, so but for dynamic listener, LREG is the process which have the intelligence. Okay, so database tells the listener about itself because database knows, right? Database has the intelligence. So database will periodically check all the services. It will just poll every time, and also it will register the services when and where it is required. So here we don't specify any manual values. So this is an automatic process and it has high intelligence. Okay, and here the entries are not hard coded in the listener.ora. So it is kind of a adaptive listener. Okay, but I would not say using dynamic listener would be more advantage than static. Both have their pros and cons. Okay, so having a static listener may be useful in certain situations, like whenever you are using a data guard, right? So having a dynamic listener would be sometimes causing some troubles. So whenever you are trying to communicate between the primary and the standby, right? So here in between the primary and the standby, we are not going to do anything dynamically. So primary IP address, host, and every port number and all these details will be same, and standby's host number, port, everything will be same. So here there is nothing to register dynamically. So obviously standby database should be having a static listener so that it can statically hard code the values and communicate with the primary, right? So for static listener, we also have another advantage. Okay, you can start the database remotely. So if the database is down, right, but if the listener is still running, listener up, TB down. So in this case, anyone who has access to sysdba, right, can access the server. Okay, and can easily directly approach the listener in a static configuration, and he can easily access the password file. Okay, so if the password file authenticates the username and password, then he can easily communicate with the database itself using SQL+. And also he can start up the database from a remote machine. So this is one of the advantage, and we can not say this is an advantage. In some cases it may be an advantage. In some cases this may be a security risk, right? So but for dynamic listener, when the database gets down, the listener will not be knowing whether the listener also will close the connections. Okay, it will not be showing any services. Okay, because it knows that the database is down, but it may not know the remote connections. because it already know locally that my current database is down, so I don't allow any other connections. So if any remote connections are approaching, I may not know what they are doing. But for static listener, even if the database is down, it may not know whether the database is down or not, but it will know whether any remote connections are coming or not. It can allow remote connections even when the database is down. So that's difference between the static and the dynamic listener. So both have their own purpose, but we can also configure both static and dynamic in some cases. So this is the architecture. So client approaches the connection via SQLnet star request. Okay, so we will be having some binaries, right, in the Oracle Home. So with that Oracle Home binaries, and also when client installs SQL Plus or SQL Developer, so there will be a SQLnet star which acts as the network intermediate between the listener and the client. So once the listener is authenticated, so next, based on the static or the dynamic, it will register the service, and also it will fork the connection, right? So registering the service, it's depending on the new service that we add. Okay, so static registration is based on listener.ora, dynamic registration is based on PMON or LREG background process. Okay, so this is one of the mandatory background process. Okay, so static registration, so this is the one. In listener.ora, you will be having this keyword SID_list. So if you have this keyword, definitely that is a static entry. So this is your homework, you can go and check. Okay, and also these three entries would be there: global DB name, SID name, and Oracle Home. So this is a static entry, hard-coded value. So beyond that, this listener will not do anything else. Okay, it does not have any intelligence, whether the load is high or not, whether connections can be load balanced or not. All these things it may not know. Okay, so yeah, a listener already knows the database information even if the database is completely down. Okay, but yeah, it allows the remote connections. So for dynamic registration, here Oracle registers automatically all the services. So we need to enable this parameter, local listener, alter system set local listener. So once we set this parameter, automatically LREG process will take care of everything, registering the service, registering the SID, if there are dispatches, registering all the dispatches and dedicated servers, and also the load information, service metrics information. So these are more concerned towards performance aspects. So it also checks the network traffic and the performance, any latency, right? So yeah, older releases used PMON for registration. Modern databases are using LRG process. So we don't need to modify anything in the listener.ora, but still we have a basic entry in the listener file. Okay. So yeah, first let us do a test case with the dynamic listener. So we start the listener, show parameter local listener, service name. So service name parameter is deprecated in the newer versions like 26AI. Okay, maybe in 19C this parameter will be still there. And yeah, we check the status. We will be seeing a status like this, ready. Okay, so whenever you are configuring static, dynamic listener, we will be seeing status as ready. But whenever you are configuring static listener, so this is dynamic. Okay, so when the listener is up, we will see the status like this. So when we shut down the database, we will not be seeing any service. It will say listener supports no service, because the listener knows that the database is already down, and dynamic registration only exists when the instance is running. Okay, so next comes the static registration. So if you see, we are stopping and starting the listener with static configuration. Then if we check the status, we will be seeing a keyword called unknown. So we can remember this. Okay, so this may be also be asked in interviews. So ready means dynamic, and unknown means static. So these are the hints that you can use to understand whether the listener that we are using is a static or a dynamic. Okay, so because listener knows database exists but cannot verify whether it is open or not. So static does not know that whether the database is running or not. Okay, so that's the reason it will always show unknown. Okay, but dynamic has the intelligence. Okay, so but if the instance is down, it will know it cannot register any service, right? Because it depends on the LREG process. If the instance is down, obviously LREG process would not be running, so it will say no services supported, right? So now remove the static entry, shut down the database, start the listener. Yeah, again we'll see no services supported. So when we try to connect remotely, we'll get this error 12514. Listener does not currently know of service requested. So this is expected, because when the client is trying to connect to the database via the service name @service name, it will directly approach the listener, right? So once the listener does not have any service details, because the database is down during the dynamic registration, it will throw an error through the front end for the client, because nothing registered, because the database is down. So the next one is we can start the database remotely using a static. So this is another advantage on the one side, and also security vulnerability on the other side. So you can use the service name, and also it should be sysdba. You cannot connect with any other user. So you can log in remotely and you can start the database. So this is something which is an awesome feature, right? So we can also remotely control the startup. So whether DBAs would be knowing or not, but this is quite very underrated. Not much of any of the people would be using these kind of scenarios, but yeah, this is one of the things that DBAs may or may not be knowing. But yeah, as per me, even I have not tried throughout my experience. Okay, so here, since you are specifying the SID in the static listener, directly it logins to the, it will approach the listener, the static listener, and it will communicate to the database via SID using the sysdba. So for this, password file is very important, because the password information would be verified from the password file whenever you are using this connection. Okay, so yeah, this is the main advantage of dynamic listener. So say for example, you are using an OLTP service, transaction system, banking system. So the current load on the server is CPU 20%, sessions connected are 500, response time is 2 milliseconds. So LREG periodically tells the listener. It has the intelligence, it has an internal algorithm which can tell the listeners about the current load, how many dispatches are working, right? And the service name, the handler status, dedicated server or shared, all these details would be updated. All the runtime metrics would be updated to the listener. Okay, so yeah, if you see in track also, this is a different case, but yeah, let us now focus on static and the dynamic listener test cases, right? So I am connected to the database. Okay, so let me just start the database if it is down. Now let me just go back to the network files. Okay, so now this is the dynamic registration. Okay, we don't have any SID underscore list underscore listener, so we have only the description and the address. So this is just a basic information about the host and the port number. Okay, so currently we are using dynamic. So also we need to verify the tnsnames.ora file. Okay, so we need this TNS string. So first just check the So since we are connecting from the local system, we don't need tnsnames.ora, but if we are connecting through service, right, we need this tnsnames.ora file. Okay. So now if I just check the status, if you see, all the status are showing as ready. Okay, so this means it is a dynamic listener. Okay, and also we see local authentication. Okay, so this is nothing related to static or dynamic listener. This is enabled on every servers. Okay, whenever you are configuring the listener, because local OS authentication is required whenever you are using the sysdba, right? So if I am using SQL plus system, now I don't specify any service name. Okay, I am just locally connecting via OS authentication, right? So how it is authenticating, how it knows that I am giving the correct password or not, right? So using the password file. So you can just, if you want to describe the password file, you can just describe like this. So if the Oracle PWD is able to describe this password file, then this means this password file is used by the database, right, for local OS authentication. Also for remote authentication as well, if we need a OS authentication, then we need the password file. Okay, so now I am not using SQL plus system like this. I am going to use the service name. Okay, what is the service name? This is the service name. So here if you see, every entry is having one service which is attached to an instance, right? So this is how the registration happens. Always you will see a service which would be attached to an instance. Okay, so here you see something else, instance caps T cell. So this is static entry. So this we need to remove it. So if I just say lsnrctl reload, lsnrctl status. So now if you see, when I reload the listener, right, previously I was seeing two service under not two instance under service T cells, 1 2 two instances are running. But now if you see, under T cells there are only one instance, there is only one instance after I reload. Why? Because previously I had a static configuration, okay, with a different name. So when I remove that static configuration, so let me just show you that. So here if you see, I have commented few things, right? So if I enable this, again we will see two instances, but now I commented, but I have not reloaded the listener. So when I reload the listener, that service is gone. Okay, so now let us use the listener communication. So even though I am connected locally on the server, but still if I need to use connect to the database via listener, then I will use @service name. So this is the service name which is running here, right? So if I just give the password, it should connect. Okay, so now I have used the listener to connect to the database. Previously I had used the local OS authentication. I didn't specify any @service, right? But still it was connecting. So this you need to understand, right? So even I can use CMD, so I can connect from Windows machine as well. Okay, so let me just provide the Oracle home. SQL plus sys as, let me just try SQL plus sys or system @ service name. Okay, so even from Windows machine I am able to connect, but the other thing is I need to have the TNS entry like this. So let me just show you the TNS entry. So this TNS entry should be given on my local operating system, which means my Windows operating system should also be having this TNS entry on my TNS names.ora file. Okay, so I'm having an Oracle database running on my Windows system, so that's why I'm able to connect via this TNS entry. So in the network admin folder I'm having TNS names.ora entry file, that's why I'm able to connect. Okay, so now what I will do is, let me just shut down the database. Okay, so my listener is running on dynamic registration. Okay, so now after the dynamic registration, again I am going to log in via system. Now I will be getting TNS errors. Listener does not currently know of service requested in the connection descriptor, because my database is down on the server side. So that's the reason I am not able to connect. Right, so now let me just try connecting as sysdba. Now if you see, even if I am trying to connect via sysdba, via the local OS authentication, dynamic registration will not support. Okay, so now if I see lsnrctl status, you see listener support no services, because the database is down and dynamic listener knows that the database is down, so it does not support any service and it does not allow any remote connections. Okay, so this is the working of dynamic listener. Okay, so now I'm just going to start the database again. Now what I will do is, I will just show you certain parameters. Okay, so for dynamic listener we need to configure this local listener. Okay, so even if you are not configuring, that's fine, right? So if you are not specifying any static entry, Oracle by default creates a dynamic listener, but still if you are configuring this, right, alter system state local listener equal to listener, so if you are configuring this, then also static listener will be used, not static, dynamic listener will be used, right? Yeah, dynamic registration requires the local listener parameter, or we need to enable it. Okay, so I'm getting some error. This is fine. So we need to enable this parameter, okay, for dynamic registration. But even if you are not enabling, by default Oracle will use the dynamic listener if you don't have any static registration. Okay, there are the other parameters as well. So we have service names. Okay, so this parameter is deprecated after 19C. So but still in 19C we will be using this service names parameter. So here we will be specifying all the services. Right, so based on that we can once you give the service name, you just say alter system register. So you can also manually register any service name, something like this, right? So that service will be reflecting. So say for example, so yeah, so currently I will not be able to update the parameters because I'm having some issue. So what I will do is, let me start the database with the p file here. So currently I am using the p file, so let me again use the sp file. So now let me just change the parameter service names, just for your understanding. So we can give anything, something like this. So if there is actually a service running, this will be registered. So now again I need to register it. Alter system. Okay, so now when I check the LSNRCTL status, you see instance is same. Okay, but I have an additional service. Once I register with the alter system register, this another additional service also got registered with the dynamic listener, and its status is ready. Okay, so that's how we can manually register the service. So but I don't have any service called T-cells1, so let me again revert it back. Okay, alter system register. So now if I check that this service will not be reflecting. Okay, so now this service got disappeared. Okay, so now what I will do is, let me go and modify the dynamic listener into a static listener. Let me just comment this entry. Okay, I'm just going to configure this SID underscore list, which is the static entry. Okay, now I'm just going to reload the listener. Now let me check the status of the listener. So now if you see, we have unknown. Okay, previously we were seeing ready, but now there is an additional entry with the unknown status. Okay, but that is starting with the uppercase letter, so I don't need any uppercase letter. Let me again change, because this may initiate another new service. Okay, this may also cause some confusions. So let me reload the listener. So now if you see that uppercase letter service gone. Okay, there is one service with uppercase letter with the static, right? So whatever you are configuring the listener.ora, that will be given precedence. So when I given the uppercase letter, service got changed to uppercase, but still the instance is running with the lowercase, because previously what I did, I just manually registered the service with the lowercase letter. So that service is also running, the lowercase service, and now after I change the static entry, that static entry is also running, but with the unknown status. Okay, so what I need to do, if I configure the static entry, right, I can just remove it, service names. Let me just remove this parameter. Let me again check the status of listener. Okay, so even if I remove the parameter, but still I see two status, one is unknown, another one is ready. So we should be seeing only the unknown status because we are using static entry. So that's fine. So now let us shut down the database. Okay, so now if you see, even though my database is shut down, still I see a service running with status unknown. Okay, yeah, previously we had two services, one with unknown and another one is ready. So this ready is the one which allows the connections, okay, when the database was up. But when the database became down, so now the ready status was gone, but the static listener does not have the intelligence to understand whether the instance is running or not, but still it is showing status as unknown. So this is how static listener work. But if you see the dynamic listener, when we shut down the database, if you see, it clearly it was clearly showing that no services supported, right, in the previous test case, right? So this is how both these listeners work. So now what I will do is, let me just try connecting remotely. So previously when we were using dynamic listener, we were getting TNS listener does not currently know of service error. So this is the only error that we will get when the dynamic listener is running and the database gets down. But now when the static listener is configured, if the database is down and the static listener is running, then let's see what happens. Okay, so it says invalid username or password, but it is somehow authenticated. Okay, only thing is the password file is not authenticating the user because there is some issue with the password. So we also need to make sure that we copy the password file from the local server to the remote server. That is also very important. So I have another system. Okay, so this is another remote system. So let me go to this remote system. Okay, so I don't have the database running here. Okay, we have some different databases running here. So from this remote system, if I see, I have just copied the P file from this server. Okay, both P file and SP file. Okay, so I also copied the password file from the local server to the remote server. Okay, so we need to generate a new password file. Okay, so you make sure that you change the password to the sys user or any other user. Once the change is recorded in the password file, or you again create a new password file and just copy the password file, P file and SP file to the remote server. So now I'm just going to log in to the database which is shut down via remote machine. Okay, so now again I am getting the same error. Okay, so now I am not providing the correct password. Okay, so there is some issue with the password. Okay, so now what I will do is, let me just create a new password file. Oracle pwd file, okay, so I think this is taking the caps password file. So let me again copy this password file with the caps. So now I have just generated the password file. Okay, I'm just copying this password file to the remote machine. Okay, still I'm getting the same error. Yeah, so now again I copied this password file. Okay, so remotely I am able to connect to the instance. Okay, so now I am in a remote machine. Okay, but this connection is to this particular local machine. Okay, so I'm just going to start the remote machine, the local machine via remote connection. I also have a P file and SP file of this particular local machine and the remote machine. Okay, so now if you see, I have just started the database remotely. So if you see, the database name is T cells, which is from this machine. But if you see in this current machine, right, here nothing will be there. It says TNS lost contact because I already started the database in another machine via the static listener. Okay, so we will not be able to start the database again from this particular host. So we can try connecting. So now if you see, I am again connected to the local database which is running on the remote machine. So this looks quite confusing. Okay, so generally we will not be doing these kind of things, but yeah, just for your knowledge purpose you can just try these options, right? So if you see pmon is running here, but if you see any other process like smon, dbwr, lgwr, lreg, so if you see all the processes are running here. So if I just check the same pmon in the remote machine, here we don't have this T cells. Okay, even though I started the database from the remote machine, all the services and processes are running here. Okay, but I cannot directly do a local authentication via sysdba, DNS last contact, right? Because I already connected via remote machine. So again I need to use the service name to connect to the machine. Okay, so again let me connect via sysdba, connect to the now let me shut down the database from the local machine itself. Okay, so now if I again connect, you see connected to an idle instance because I shut down from the local instance, I mean the local server. Okay, so this is the main advantage of using a static listener. Okay, so hope you understood the main advantages and disadvantages of using the static and the dynamic listener, right? So you can also configure both in some cases. Okay, so hope you like this video.